side to protect our economy and create jobs. The American dream has been a nightmare for the 45 million living in poverty and is turning quickly into a nightmare for millions who are falling from middle income into the ranks of the poor. The bill put forth today by Republicans guarantees this tragic outcome.
From Mississippi, Mr. Nunley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the remains of Corporal Judge C. Helms of Paris, Mississippi, were returned from the Paru Forest near Lunéville, France, and given a proper burial in Arlington National Cemetery. In the fall of 1944, following the Normandy invasion, Corporal Helms' unit, the 773rd Tank Battalion, was fighting its way east through France toward the German border. The M10 tank destroyer to which he was assigned was attacked. 2 men survived with serious injuries, but Corporal Helms, along with Private First Class Lawrence N. Harris of Elkins, West Virginia, and Private Donald D. Owens of Cleveland, Ohio, were killed in the attack. All evidence at the time indicated that their remains had been destroyed. Over the last decade, through the cooperation of a French citizen who had been exploring the forest and the joint POW-MIA accounting command, using DNA evidence and forensic identification tools, the remains of these heroes were identified. On July 20th, 2011, 67 years after their death, they were given the proper burial they had been denied as they were laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. To these heroes, we say welcome home, and may you rest in peace. While these soldiers were identified, we still have 72,000 American soldiers who were unaccounted for from World War II, and more than 83,000 from all wars who are missing in action. Staff Sergeant Leroy List is one of those Americans. In 1944, his World War II bomber was shot down over the North Sea. His body, along with several of his fellow crew members, was never recovered. For more than a decade, Adrienne Caldwell has worked tirelessly to locate her father's remains and bring them home. All of our heroes deserve a proper burial, and my office is working with Mrs. Caldwell to ensure that her father received what he earned, the honor and gratitude from the country he served and gave his life to defend. This repatriation reminds us that freedom is not free. We enjoy the liberty of a free nation today because of men like these who answered freedom's call. And the way we honor their sacrifice is to remember them and to call them by name. The greatest generation is passing to their heavenly reward at a rate of over 1,000 people a day. These are veterans who left their homes to fight in faraway places. These are families who supported those efforts. We cannot thank them enough before they're called home. The other way we honor their sacrifice is to pass on the legacy of freedom that they died to defend. When I conduct town hall meetings around Mississippi, I ask a question. Do you believe your grandchildren will live a better life than you lived? For the first time in American history, the answer to that question is no. 67 years from now, and 167 years from now, successive generations will review the actions of our generation. Only history will record if we answered freedom's call. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed with an amendment, H.R. 2608, cited as the Small Business Program Extension and Reform Act of 2011, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
My colleagues, yesterday I was talking about the American dream, But then again, I was thinking about how many people have waken up this morning concerned about our national debt. When you represent the type of district that I do and many other members, they're concerned about can they get a job or can they keep the job they have. They're concerned about the bills and obligations that they have. They're concerned about whether they can keep their kids in school, whether they keep food on the table, whether they have the dignity and the pride and not have their dreams shattered by this nightmare that their country owes $14.3 trillion. And we're making a special appeal to Americans, Republicans, and Democrats not to allow our country to get caught in a position that we don't pay our bills. I suspect that a lot of my constituents would say, well, how the heck did I get that bill? How did we owe $14.3 trillion? And what did I have to do with it? And I guess we have to say, honestly, you didn't have much to do with it. You did not go into countries and get involved in 3 wars. You were not responsible for saying that the riches of Americans and corporations that are receiving large profits, you should have and continue to have preferential tax treatment. Well, why are you telling me then that I have to pay the debt? If we all are going to pitch in this, what about the guys that will not be making a sacrifice? Well, that's kind of difficult to explain to these people, but you tell them that there are people in the Congress who truly believe that they can address their problem by having a constitutional amendment. I know it's a stretch, but that's what some of us have to deal with in the Congress. But you've heard some of them this morning. So the only answer to our problem is to have a vote in the House of Representatives and persuade 2/3 of our members that in the United States Constitution we will require a balanced budget. Now, after we get 2/3 here, we can't get 2/3 to agree to anything, but hey, then we have to get 2/3 from the Senate. And we only hold the Senate by 1 vote, but it's a commentary because after we do that, then we have to go out to the states and ask the state legislators to approve what we have done, at least 2/3 of the states. That's their answer to those people who had an American dream. It would seem to me that along the line they may ask, well, who received the benefits of all of this debt? And I would suspect that a lot of the people that manufacture military equipment had a windfall. I would suspect that those people that were able to take jobs overseas, the profit and loss books look like they did pretty well. In the financial section, our committee voted, and it was approved by the President, $789 billion to be given to the financial community. And God knows they say these are the people that can create the jobs. Well, I don't know whether any economist agrees with that, but they have enjoyed these tax cuts for decades, and we now are at the highest unemployment that we've ever been. And it would seem to me that those who have, through the benefits of all of our taxpayers, received this windfall, that it's not asking too much to ask them to invest in their country, to invest in jobs, to not look how much profit they can make overseas, but how many lives can they have to get a decent salary, to be able to join the union, to be able to pay their bills, and at the same time be able to go back to work. This answer that everyone makes a sacrifice, it's not talking about the private sector that made the money. I don't even know why sacrifice is even used in any dialogue. What we're basically saying is that we have to cut spending. Well, everyone would agree to that, but these people that are receiving benefits from their government are the ones that will be making the sacrifice. And as we cut the benefits, whether we're talking about education benefits, health care benefits, supplements to pensions are sometimes the only funds that they have in retirement in Social Security. Whether we're talking about checks for the disabled who cannot work, now they want to cut those programs and the people that provide the service. So that means that they will be increasing the number of people that are unemployed. It just doesn't make sense that we have unemployment compensation and other things for people who have disposable income, but we cut $4 trillion from those people that are trying to survive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to address the House.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomet, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's no question this Congress for many years has had a problem with spending. The Democratic Congress developed a bigger and bigger appetite for spending for 40 years, as it held the majority for years and years. Then Republicans took the House in 1995, and they forced a balanced budget on President Clinton. They had friction between the President and the Congress, and that allowed this country to have a balanced budget. Who would have ever thought? I certainly wouldn't. I know I've got some Democrat friends that would have thought it, but I wouldn't have. But when we got a Republican president and we had Republican majorities in the House and Senate, we began to spend again. There wasn't a friction there to hold spending down, and Republicans, I would submit, lost their way, began spending too much money. My first year in Congress in 2005 and 2006, we shouldn't have spent the money we did, and I can recall being here on the floor and having Democratic friends beating us up, rightfully so, because in 2006 we spent $160 billion more than we had coming in. We didn't have to do that. We shouldn't have done that. I would never have dreamed that 5 short years later that with the Democratic majority, the spending would have exploded once they had no friction between a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, and that we would go from the $160 billion in deficit spending in 2006 that Republicans got beat up for to $1.6 trillion in deficit spending, 10 times more, and people still thinking that's somehow okay. It wasn't okay for Republicans to overspend by $160 billion, and it's not okay for this Democratic Senate and President to continue to push to spend $1.6 trillion, more than the $2.2 trillion we supposedly will have come in. Now we're told today we're going to have a vote on a Republican bill. Well, surprising to some of us Republicans, we passed a bill, cut, cap, and balance. It wasn't what I wanted. I liked the balanced budget amendment with a percentage of GDP cap on spending to help rein Congress in, and that was negotiable on the percentage. But it also had $111 billion out of $1.6 trillion that would have been cut from spending. That just wasn't enough. But the balanced budget amendment, if it had been passed and become part of the law, was enough of a game changer. It was worth voting for. Then the Senate sits back and said, we're not going to go for that. We're not even going to pass anything, so pass something else. And now our leadership has heard the call of Leader Reid down the hall and is going to bring another bill. And I know the intentions of both sides of the aisle. They want the best for the country. I get that. I understand that. We have different ideas on how that can be done. And I know that there are people in my party that want to keep beating up on me because I can't vote for a bill that only cuts $1 trillion out of 15 to 16 trillion that will be deficit spending over the next 10 years. Because it's easy to do the math. We cut $1 trillion out of 15, 16 trillion over the next 10 years, and if we can keep doing that, and there's no assurance we can, every 10 years cut another $1 trillion, then when I have my 207th birthday, we can celebrate that year a balanced budget. And we will have only added $120 trillion to the $14.3 trillion deficit now. I can't vote for that. Politically, we're told, gee, this is the political thing to do. You've got to do the political thing. If you don't vote for Boehner bill, you're voting for Obama. That's not true. If the Senate will pass anything, then we could drive this to a conference committee and get a compromise. The Senate has to pass something. Well, think about this scenario very quickly. We passed this, say hypothetically. The Senate said, oh, well, you pushed us to the edge of the cliff. We didn't want to vote for this. Then they pass it just like we did, and the President said, I was going to veto it, but we're on the edge of the cliff. 100% Republican bill. They wouldn't compromise, and now they say, well, gee, Republicans inherited the economy. It's not right. Practically, it's not politically. Let's do the right thing.
Chair
for
recognizes
America.
the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. Delario, for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the Horn of Africa is currently suffering from the worst drought in 60 years, one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent memory. For both moral and national security reasons, it demands a strong, clear, sustained response from this institution. Last week, famine was declared in parts of southern Somalia. This means acute malnutrition rates among children now exceed 30%, that more than 2 people per 10,000 die every day, and that people are not able to access food or basic necessity. 1 out of every 5 households in famine-declared areas have no food at all. The malnutrition rates in Somalia are currently the highest in the world. In the last few months, tens of thousands of Somalis, the majority of them children, have died as a result of causes related to malnutrition. And in some of the most affected areas, an estimated 310,000 children are acutely malnourished. The worst may yet to come. 8 million people are in need of assistance in Ethiopia and Kenya, and unless the global community and humanitarian agencies intervene now, it's predicted that the entire south of Somalia will face famine within the next 2 months. Nearly 1,000 people are arriving daily at overcrowded refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia. Many have journeyed for weeks to get there. According to Josette Sheeran, who is executive director of the UN World Food Program, the roads to these camps are, and I quote, are becoming roads of death. Over half the women I talked to have had to leave children to die or had children die. In the Horn of Africa, we could lose a generation. The troubles do not end there. Sexual violence against women in these already overcrowded refugee camps is on the rise. This crisis didn't happen overnight. The Eastern Horn of Africa is prone to chronic food insecurity. What is more, below average rainfall in the late 2010 and the spring of 2011 anticipated drought conditions, which have been dramatically worsened by the fact that Somalia has not had a central government since 1991. Drought conditions have also progressively worsened throughout the year in Ethiopia and Kenya. To address the ongoing crisis, Secretary Clinton recently announced that the United States would provide another $28 million in aid for people in Somalia and for Somali refugees in Kenya, in addition to the over $431 million in food and non-food emergency assistance already provided for the region this year. It's a good start, but we need to ensure that the appropriate U.S. funds are available to address this crisis this year, and that Congress provides enough funding to maintain our ability to really address these crises. It is a matter of life and death for the most vulnerable people in the world. We do this not just out of moral responsibility, although that should be compelling enough. It is also because our national security interests need to be represented. To maintain the capability to combat food insecurity in the Horn of Africa and other critical regions around the world is about our national security. Anti-hunger programs that can help this crisis and strengthen international diplomacy. And yet, unfortunately, we have seen the money for international food aid cut back severely. When we fight hunger and poverty, we undercut the recruiting base of those who would threaten us, the terrorists who would threaten us. Let me conclude by saying we know what we can do to help. We have the ability to alleviate hunger and suffering of millions in the Horn of Africa. We know that doing so is the right thing to do. It makes us safer in the long run. We lack the political will to do the right thing. I urge my colleagues, support funding for these critical programs in the coming budget, for the millions suffering in Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia, for the humanitarian crises of the future, for the continued safety and the security of the United States. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Alabama, Ms. Sewell, for 5 minutes.
I ask to revive my remarks.
Without objection.
I rise today to recognize the 145th anniversary of Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Selma, Alabama. For 145 years, Brown Chapel has been a pillar in the Selma community, and she stands today as a powerful symbol of the civil rights movement and for the major role that this church played in the events that led to the adoption of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 145 years ago, just 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, freed slaves began worshiping first in private homes and eventually in the basement of the Hotel Albert in Selma, Alabama. 145 years ago, on August 31st, 1867, an African Methodist Episcopal missionary, Brother John Turner, addressed the group assembled in the basement of the Hotel Albert and extended them an invitation to unite with the African Methodist Episcopal Connection. 2 years later, in 1869, these visionary church members bought a plot of land on Sylvan Street, now known as Martin Luther King Street. This beautiful edifice, known as Brown Chapel, that stands today, was built in 1908 by a black builder, Mr. A.J. Farley. Today we celebrate 145 years of Brown Chapel, a history of faith, courage, and leadership. It took great courage in the early 1960s to defy an injunction that forbade all churches in Selma, Alabama from holding mass meetings. Most churches in Selma refused to disobey the court order. But Brown Chapel opened its doors to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. and became that wonderful church of courage that played such an integral role in the civil rights movement. Brown Chapel became an icon of the movement. It was from Brown Chapel that they marched on Bloody Sunday, and 2 days later on Turnaround Tuesday. And on March 21st, 1965, the day when the Selma to Montgomery March was finally completed. Leading the infamous Bloody Sunday was Hosea Williams, as well as our esteemed colleague in this chamber, Congressman John Lewis of Georgia. The story of Bloody Sunday will go down in the annals of history as a pivotal event in the civil rights movement. On March 7th, 1965, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, 6 blocks from Brown Chapel, AME Church, mounted troops confronted the marchers on that bridge. Sheriff Jim Clark and his posse charged the marchers with tear gas and with billy clubs. That night, ABC News interrupted regularly scheduled program to air footage of Bloody Sunday. By morning, news of the events had spread nearly to every American household, and thousands of supporters began to flock to Selma. The Selma to Montgomery March and the subsequent public outrage led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. For 145 years, Brown Chapel has been a powerful agent of change. It has been a place where socioeconomic and racial barriers have been challenged, a place where barriers that divide our nation have been broken down. Brown Chapel continues to make history. On March 4th, 2007, then Senator Barack Obama, a presidential candidate, gave the address for the annual bridge crossing commemoration. It was during this address in 2007 that Obama thanked the Moses generation and challenged the Joshua generation. In his famous Joshua generation speech, Obama asked the present generation what would they do to fulfill the legacy, the obligations and the debts that were owed to the people who came before them. As a proud member of Brown Chapel Church, I had the privilege of being there that day, and for me, his words were a call to action. It was because people prayed in Brown Chapel and people marched in the Edmund Pettus Bridge that a little black girl from Selma, Alabama could dream and could one day stand here in this wonderful chamber as the first black congresswoman from the state of Alabama. Brown Chapel has been a pillar in my hometown of Selma, Alabama, and it still remains so today. I am a proud member of this church and have been for the last 30 years of my life. I was raised in this beautiful historic church, and I know its significance. I am now proud to represent the 7th Congressional District of Alabama and proud of the many giants on whose shoulders I stand. In honor of the 105th anniversary of the historic Brown Chapel AME Church, I, Terry Sewell, representative to the United States Congress from the 7th Congressional District, do hereby recognize Brown Chapel for its numerous contributions to the city of Selma, the state of Alabama, and this nation. And I ask those present today to join me in celebrating 145 years of historic Brown Chapel AME Church. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Republican majority has once again proven its complete irresponsibility by putting our economy at risk and handling our nation's finances. A little over a decade ago, there were projected surpluses as far as the eye could see, and the nation was on firm financial footing. That was before the George Bush administration, and the Republicans took us on a spending spree, paying out trillions in huge tax cuts, skewed to guess who? The top 2%, the wealthy. And they killed jobs. The last month that George Bush was in office, we lost over 700,000 jobs just in that month. And then they plunged the nation during that decade into 2 wars they refused to pay for. History tells the story. Then came the big collapse. That included a loss in federal revenues that followed the largest economic downturn since the Great Depression due to George Bush's capitulation to Wall Street abuse. Now, Republicans claim to care about the federal deficit. Yes, revenues have shrunk by about $400 billion a year because of the financial crisis we're trying to dig ourselves out of. Spread out over 10 years, that covers the roughly $4 trillion we're trying to eke out of this sick economy. But it's a very delicate balance because there's 14 million Americans out of work and up to 24 million who are working part-time that want to work full-time, or others who've completely given up and dropped out. Fewer jobs mean lower revenues at all levels. It means lower profits to many companies. And it certainly means lower revenues into the federal treasury because there are more people who are on unemployment, more people who rely on government assistance, more people who rely on public health because their private insurance dried up. How many people can't pay their COBRA? Conversely, they're not earning a paycheck and able to pay their contributions for social insurance into Social Security and Medicare. So it's a vicious cycle. In any time of economic downturn, it's like a teeter-totter. The government has to, at the federal level, help prop up the American people until they can find their footing again. It doesn't take a mental giant to figure that out. Unemployment is the major cause of the deficit that we are bearing now, yet we hear almost no discussion about jobs, creating jobs, getting rid of unemployment, and lifting the economy, healing the republic. Rather than talking about jobs and how unemployment causes lost revenues and kills more jobs, House Republicans have placed the entire economy at risk now to satisfy the ideological wishes of a few. Well, the American public sees what's happening. Nobody's being fooled. I've heard from thousands of people back home in northern Ohio who are concerned that the Republican leadership is playing politics, playing with fire during a time when our economic recovery is very, very fragile. Putting our nation's credit rating at risk is totally irresponsible and will cause more harm. I had somebody tell me yesterday they were trying to renegotiate their home loan and the company wanted to raise their interest rate 0.25% because of the uncertainty all of this is causing. Since World War I, our country has always received a AAA status from credit rating agencies because until now we have always put the nation first, not any political party first, but the nation first. To force America to default for the first time in history would hurt the republic and every working family, and it would hurt those who are out of work as well. It would mean higher interest rates on cars, on home loans, on credit cards, on student loans. It would mean fewer jobs and less growth. Instability, uncertainty, creates a downdraft on the recovery. Congress should be focusing on economic recovery and creating jobs if we want to close that deficit gap. You balance budgets by full employment economies. We surpassed the debt limit over 2 months ago, and come August 2nd, the Treasury will simply not be able to pay all the bills that are currently due. Yes, it's long overdue to reach a compromise. Instead, Speaker Boehner has walked away from the negotiating table and chosen to roll out a hasty bill that hasn't gone through the normal committee process. Apparently, many in his own party reject it. This isn't leadership for America at a time when she needs it. It may be capitulation to Grover Norquist and his lobby, but our responsibility is far greater. Mr. Speaker, the way that you balance budgets is to put people to work and grow the economy. I support a balanced, bipartisan solution to reduce our deficit, create jobs, and grow our economy, expand our middle class, and protect Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid beneficiaries. I yield back my remaining time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Over, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we face an unnecessary crisis. The debt limit has never before been held hostage by any political party because it's in every American's best interests to protect the credit of the United States. But now ideologues in Congress have hijacked this issue, pushed our nation to the brink of default, rejecting all offers of compromise. There are calls for massive spending cuts, and spending cuts alone, without raising any revenues whatsoever, are irresponsible at least and deliberately destructive at worst. They would default on our debt, causing a global financial crisis rather than see hedge fund managers, corporate jet owners, or phenomenally profitable oil companies pay higher taxes. Their call for fiscal responsibility rings hollow, and the fiscal history of the last 3 decades shows that. This chart shows the growth of America's national debt since 1980. At the end of the Carter administration, the national debt was less than $1 trillion. 12 years later, President Reagan's 8 years and the first President Bush's 4 years, the national debt had grown by more than 300%. It had quadrupled, and we were mired in debt. The Reagan-Bush economic policies greatly increased the debt, led to soaring deficits, rising interest rates, and ended in recession. In 1993, President Clinton was under severe pressure from the very Republicans who had meekly followed the 2 Republican presidents as they raised the national debt by over 300%. President Clinton championed a balanced austerity program with roughly equal spending cuts and revenue increases, the Clinton years. Republicans in both the House and Senate voted unanimously against that program, arguing it would cost jobs and cause a recession. But the exact opposite occurred. More than 20 million jobs were created under the Clinton administration, and each of the last 3 budgets of the Clinton presidency produced a surplus. Those 3 budgets were the only budgets in surplus in the last 40 years, and Clinton's balanced program is considered highly successful by economists. President Clinton raised taxes on those who could afford and reduced spending to shrink our deficit, and the economy grew by leaps and bounds. The fiscal record of the second President Bush is a record of utter irresponsibility. It began with massive tax cuts skewed sharply toward the wealthy and trillions of dollars spent on 2 long, unpopular wars, all of that paid for by borrowing. It ended in the Great Recession caused by the collapse of an unregulated housing market fueled by Wall Street greed. President Bush turned President Clinton's surplus into more than $5 trillion additional dollars added to our national debt, all the way up to here, almost doubling the debt again. President Obama was inaugurated during the worst month of job losses in the Great Recession and cannot be blamed for what happened before, but the recovery is stalled and we're short 12 million jobs. History has shown us what works and what doesn't. The Reagan-Bush economics led to hugely increased debt. The Clinton economics eliminated the deficit and accelerated economic growth, but required some sacrifice by all Americans to fix a national problem. Now Republicans want to slash social programs, gut Medicare and Social Security benefits, and further reduce taxes for the wealthiest few. The Republicans threaten default on our debt. The only plan they offer would add hundreds of thousands of people to the unemployment lines by eliminating jobs in the public sector. They would protect the wealthiest few at the expense of the entire country. They offer no plan to create jobs and no long-term solution. Yet America needs a long-term solution, and that must include spending reduction and revenue increase in balanced proportion. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The elaborate kabuki dance continues here on Capitol Hill surrounding the angst about increasing the debt ceiling. I think what we're seeing can be summarized in 3 words: reckless, abuse, and hypocrisy. First of all, it is reckless for my Republican friends to hold the debt ceiling discussions hostage in an attempt to achieve other political goals. There have already been significant costs. American currency has weakened. We've watched a slide of the stock market since last Friday when the agreement blew up as Speaker Boehner walked away from his work with President Obama. We've watched premiums being paid now to insure United States debt. People are making adjustments that are having consequences right now and eroding the confidence that we have had globally in the strength of American commitments to pay its debt. A confidence that has resulted in record low interest rates that have benefited everybody in the United States, and that is at risk. The irony is that there's no reason for this to occur. We have increased the debt ceiling 117 times since this unusual little law was enacted in 1917. The United States, recall, is one of only 2 countries in the entire world that goes through this charade of having to vote to finance spending that we've already done. It has always been routine. We did this routinely for President Bush. The irony is now, when we are facing another adjustment in the debt ceiling, ironically, most of the debt $9.5 billion was incurred as a direct result of the policies of the two presidents, Bush and Ronald Reagan. There's a great little chart on page A14 in today's New York Times that lines this out. Instead of making it routine and making whatever pontification people will do on the floor of the House, which they have done since 1917, now all of a sudden we've thrown a monkey wrench into the process. We've raised the specter of default. We're having people speculate whether there's enough money to go to August 2nd or August 5th. We're speculating about what debts, what bills the president will pay. The irony is that this Republican recklessness is actually empowering the president of the United States to make decisions about whether to pay Chinese creditors or honor our obligations to senior citizens or people that do business with the government of the United States. Absolutely outrageous, but these are decisions, ironically, that wouldn't you think Congress would like to make rather than punting to the president? Well, no. In fact, the Republicans are more than willing to punt to the president the decision about lifting the debt ceiling, even though the law that we have puts that responsibility on Congress. It's reckless and it's unnecessary. Second, there is an abuse of power. You know, the American public overwhelmingly wants a balanced solution with a little bit of revenue increase, maybe taking some unjustified tax loopholes, not slashing budgets unilaterally. They want a balanced approach. But my Republican friends, having taken control of one chamber, now think that they ought to be able to dictate to the other body, dictate to the President of the United States, have their way or the highway. It's not what the American public wants. It's not what should happen in our system of democracy, where there should be some give and take and some compromise. But no, what we're seeing is an unfortunate abuse of power on the part of some people who are willing to take hostage the debt ceiling negotiation and risk economic damage to the United States, to our families and businesses. And third is a case of hypocrisy. You know, the Republican plan, the so-called cut, cap, and balance, would require, and they passed it last week in the floor of the House, would require cutting spending for the government to 18% of the overall economy. Interesting number. Ronald Reagan never even proposed a budget that was less than 21%. They're talking about draconian cuts to things that the American public relies upon, everything from food safety to infrastructure to education. But when the time came to vote for it this week, they voted no on an amendment that would have implemented that type of cut. Thank you,
Chair
Mr. Speaker.
recognizes the gentlewoman from Kansas, Ms. Jenkins, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Where is the President's plan? If I had a nickel for every time I have heard that question, we would be much closer to resolving our debt crisis. But the President and my friends across the aisle have still not answered the most important question of all: where is their plan for job creation? House Republicans have a plan. At the core of this plan is passing the 3 pending trade agreements. These trade agreements have the ability to immediately create thousands of jobs, open new markets for our farmers, ranchers, and manufacturers, and to play a pivotal role in growing our economy. Yet the President continues to stand in the way. These agreements create jobs, period. So let's pass these agreements with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. Let's reauthorize the GSP and the Andrian Trade Preference Act, and finally fulfill our duty to the American people. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12, Paren A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until the hour of 12 noon today.
And the U.S. House will be back in under 15 minutes to begin consideration of the debt ceiling and deficit reduction plan, Speaker Boehner's plan.